Horizons. I am Tyra Mariani, a JFF board member and president of the Schultz Family Foundation. I am delighted to be sitting here with Sheri Schultz, who is the co-founder and chair of the foundation. And we're delighted to talk to you today, or talk to each other, I guess is the better word, about our work of creating opportunity that is accessible to all. So let's start with Sheri. Most people probably don't know, but the foundation was actually established in 1996. Tell us how it came into being.
That's a long time ago, Tyra. It started very small. I began to see in the neighborhoods that I was driving through that there was incredible disparity in young kids on the street, and the homeless problem began. Although it felt excessive then compared to what it is now, I mean, it's worse now than it was then, we began to start talking about it publicly. And I came home to my husband, Howard, and said that community members need to start taking charge and helping. And so we decided to start a foundation. And the process started slowly, since I knew nothing about foundation other than working in communities in terms of service. I went to United Way and showed me the best programs that you have in terms of NGOs and nonprofits, and why are they good and what makes them best in class. And I took probably about a year and a half, and on the ground went to a lot of these programs, and it became clear that there were tremendous opportunities that people in philanthropy could help make a difference.
Yeah. And one of the things I've noticed about you is you light up when we talk about youth or young adults in particular. And so the foundation has focused on that, but tell me more about why youth?
See, you're lighting up already.
One of the first places that I went to was in a van for a nonprofit called Youth Care. And in the back of Dick's Burgers, there was a truck that we delivered to young homeless kids, boys and girls, clean socks, food, hot soup, etc. And there was this immediate connection. They were so grateful. There was such responsiveness, and it felt like these are our young kids. They could have easily been your children or my children, and a zip code or something that changed their lives exponentially put them out there on the streets, and I wanted to know more.
Yeah, that's so great. One of the other things I've noticed about you, which I appreciate because it's a very holistic approach, is you're not okay with just helping you get a job. Or I think what I'd say differently is there's a bit of whatever it takes, and recognizing that it's more than just skills. We often focus on education or skill development, and you're always thinking much more beyond that. Say more about what you're thinking beyond that and why that's the case.
Well, first, I'd probably take it back to one of the first programs we developed was a barista training program at Youth Care. We noticed immediately that there was this long line of kids that were coming in from the streets and wanted to learn how to be baristas. There was also no attrition. So that was the first green flag. No attrition. They continued to go to school as long as they could stay in the program. I watched from day one through a 12-week training course, the change in these young kids when they began to feel success for the first time. It was incredible. And so I understood that was only one piece of the equation. I mean, economic mobility starts with the job, but there are so many parameters around keeping a young person safe and going from survival to actually thriving in communities.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you said, I was just having a conversation with someone this morning that the power of social networks, of which mentorship is one component of that. And I said, at first I thought it was all about education. Like I went to Howard and then I went to Stanford. And then I realized those key moments and those champions in my life that really made a difference. And I was like, it wasn't just like Howard to McKinsey Consulting. It was actually a Howard alum who came back to Howard, who was at McKinsey, came back and said, give me some of your best students. And then another alum took me on his motorcycle on weekends to help me prepare for the interview itself. And so it was like, wait a minute, it's actually not just doing great in school. It was this social network, which wasn't mine, but it was part of the Howard network that enabled me to get that job, because Howard on its own would not, because I just didn't know how to do the case method. And I think we miss those moments. And you tell me about being at when we were doing the 100K career fair, of like taking young people and helping them to get the other pieces that would then help them get the job.
So what Tyra's referring to is, it's called 100K, and it was an opportunity fair that we began several years ago in partnership with Starbucks and other companies. The idea was to do a fair on steroids that would have every opportunity for a young person to come in and learn how to do a CV, or how to interview, what kind of job, like where were their strengths and qualities that would have helped them prevail into an opportunity with the job. And if you start, it's all about experience, Tyra. When you're in the job fair, when you're at the job fair, when you are talking to young people and meeting them where they are, you begin to realize that their strengths may be exponentially better than the next kid that gets interviewed, but they may not know how to talk about it. They may not understand things about, if you're working in customer service, what is conflict resolution? One young kid that had interviewed at Starbucks and didn't get a job looked like a deer in headlights, and I saw him walking through the fair, and I would sit down with them and say, did you do a mock interview? And I'd, no, what is that? And I said, you need to be prepared, and there's all of these things you need to think about when you're being asked a question. There's a reason for it. And conflict resolution is about how you work with people. And you might be in an environment where your boss says something you don't like. You don't walk out the door. You have to listen. You have to take it in. Or if you're going to be late to work, or you're a single mother, and you're not going to make it in because your young child is sick, you have to make that phone call. Even though it feels yucky, you have to make the phone call. So accountability is a piece of it, but it's such a big picture when you think about what parents teach their children every single day. And a lot of these young kids, their parents might be working 2 or 3 jobs, or they may have been in 15 foster care families. So we can't take for granted what they don't know. And we have to understand that they have tremendous opportunities if you give it to them, if you school them, and if you give them the time. So mentorship is critical.
Yeah. And I think that the other thing that's near and dear to me is that sometimes we take our privilege for granted of the things that are available and accessible to us. Like, you're like, hey, to your earlier point of, they could have been my kids or your kids, or, it's just sometimes just that unique set of circumstances or barriers that prevent one from realizing their full potential. The other thing you're bringing to mind for me is, how we're thinking about evolving the foundation's work. And the foundation historically had focused on opportunity youth, which was defined as youth who are disconnected from work and education. And I've been I'm thinking about it in 2 or 3 dimensions. One is, how do we prevent disconnection? What are the enablers and inhibitors to disconnection? What are the things that most assuredly will help our young people stay connected, like graduating from high school and getting into some level of post-secondary access? Or what are the things that almost assuredly will create disconnection? Like we heard just yesterday, we had that juvenile justice learning session, and heard that 90% of Black males involved in the justice system, young adults, are like 90% of them will become involved in the adult incarceration system. And so that's one of the pieces that I'm asking. But then there's this other piece of, you know, how do we, rather than focus on the highest barrier, when we apply an equity lens to the work that we do, you actually widen the aperture and you start looking at even first generation Black and brown college graduates, because they are actually not getting the same types of jobs with the same kinds of salaries as their white peers. And so I'm both thinking about that equity lens and how it shapes our work and how we will help those that are disconnected, but we're actually going to also start working on that piece that gets in front of the disconnection so that young people can really be on a path. Because I think that's the third thing I mentioned is it's more than getting a job. It's about being on a path towards
economic mobility.
Economic mobility, exactly. So we know some get stuck in entry-level jobs and some move on. How do we help more of our young people? And we see this all too often in BIPOC communities, adults even, that they get stuck in those entry-level jobs. How do we put them on that path to mobility?
So, it's really interesting because you've probably heard me say that young people, the next generation that will represent us and be part of communities around the country, have this incredible. They're more aware than we were. They have tenacity and they have this ability to kind of mobilize themselves in areas where we never even thought about, because jobs are harder to get. Balancing a checkbook becomes more difficult if you're at the minimum wage. So there's a much bigger opportunity with a community of NGOs and nonprofits around the country to begin to work together, because none of us are going to be able to solve this problem by ourselves. And the truth is circumstances have everything to do with who does well and who doesn't. I mean, if you draw a line in the sand of zip code, and you've got a group here in a low socioeconomic neighborhood, they're probably most likely not going to get as many opportunities in school.
Yes.
And then how do they even navigate a system in terms of community college, vocation, however they want to look at it? And so we have to start there. And I think it probably is somewhere in the middle school, but early education is critical too.
Yes.
But what you're really talking about is we started with programs. Programs are the humanity of foundations, because it allows you to be in communities where you begin to really understand, see, and live with people that have the issues, the problems that can be solved, that should be solved, that we have a responsibility to participate in getting them to a different place. Mm-hmm. But in order to do that, you have to develop systems, and it's a tri-sector collaboration. It's philanthropy, it's local and city officials, it's policy work, and I think you should actually speak to that, because that's why we brought you to the foundation. You have the strength and character and the history to be able to do that. Yeah. So why don't you speak to what we did with national service?
Yeah. Well, so a great point, and love how you brought all of those things together, because I do, having spent time in government, in NGOs, now in a foundation, in even the private sector, I really understand the assets that all those different sectors bring. And none of our most entrenched problems are going to be solved alone. Like, there aren't many things, I can't think of anything, quite frankly, where it's like, the private sector solved that, or, government solved that. Like, we really do have to leverage our collective set of assets to bring that to bear. And as you alluded to, we started the Washington COVID Service Response Corps in response of bringing the private and public sector together and our work to both meet communities in need in Washington, who we know that food insecurity skyrocketed over this last year through no fault of their own. And then we had young people whose lives were upended by, remote learning that was very difficult for anyone.
Lost jobs
As part of that. And so we had this opportunity. And the other thing is, we know that the Response Corps, which leveraging that AmeriCorps infrastructure model, has lots of people have been talking about the need for innovation, the need for doing how do we make service accessible to all people? How do we make it accessible to people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, Black and Brown people as part of that? And so we created, through partnership with the state commission, we created this opportunity to be a catalyst for doing things differently, for setting goals for the diversity of the AmeriCorps, for raising the stipend and towards the living wage.
which was critical.
Because if I need income for my family, go serve and make, substandard living, it's just, the choice is obvious. And so I think that was a great example, which, now we're doing the national challenge to get more philanthropies to step up and think about service as an opportunity for equity, an opportunity to help in the recovery as part of that. So that is a big piece of it. And the other thing we've talked about that you just mentioned is, I remember coming in saying, if we only focus on programs, your children's children are going to be doing programs and giving away money for that. And until we start to address the systems, because the reality is that these programs come about because the systems aren't working.
Right.
The programs are as much interventions to a broken system than anything else. So if we don't do the work of trying to prevent the need for the interventions and programs, then we're just going to be kind of running in the same place the whole time. And so we will do that responsive work of, yes, people need jobs now, they need training, they need access to social networks, but then we're also going to do that longer term work that says, how do we make the system work better for everyone? Because so much of it is broken. And so we need more interventions, we need more solutions. We're going to be making those investments, but we're also going to do the other work of thinking about how do we no longer need some of these programs.
A few years ago when Howard said to me, I think national service is the answer, I didn't quite get it. He was at the 50,000 foot level and here I am on the ground, national service. How are you going to make it work? Well, the most interesting part about it is when we decided to put this program together and how it evolved is we weren't just taking a BIPOC community or kids from all the different impoverished areas in the state of Washington and saying to them, we're going to pay you, a certain wage and you're going to deliver food. We actually gave them the opportunity to think about how they could best serve their community and how to get food to people that didn't have access to it. And they developed over 70, this is 100 young people, they developed over 70 food banks that serve the community. They will walk away with a tremendous skill set to be able to apply to the next position that they decide to do. They've learned empathy. They've given back to community. So it's not just
and valuable work opportunities.
Valuable work opportunities and a future.
Yeah. Well, I think we have maybe 1 minute left. So I would just say, what gives you hope in this moment?
I'm really hopeful. I believe that, first of all, I think our communities have changed. People are more aware that they have a responsibility. And I don't know how they decide they want to serve, in terms of how philanthropy will look to them. But we all have a responsibility. And if we take it on the way that I think we are capable as human beings, as caring people, as humanitarians, I think that we will be able to create tremendous opportunities for all. And that's exciting.
Yeah. I'm not going to even add to that, Sheri. Thank you for this conversation today.
Thank you, Tyra.
And I hope you at Horizons enjoyed the same conversation as well. And good luck for the rest of the convening.